The Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, was founded in 1947. It was created to gather intelligence and conduct covert operations abroad. From its inception, the CIA has played a significant role in shaping global events. Its activities have often been shrouded in secrecy, making it difficult to fully assess their impact. However, there is no doubt that the CIA has left its mark on the Middle East. The CIA's involvement in the Middle East dates back to the early days of the Cold War. During this era, the United States viewed the region as a battleground against Soviet influence. The CIA engaged in various covert operations aimed at supporting pro-Western regimes and undermining those seen as sympathetic to the Soviet Union. These interventions had long-lasting consequences and continue to shape the political landscape of the Middle East today. The CIA's actions in the Middle East have been controversial. Some argue that the agency has played a necessary role in protecting U.S. interests. Others contend that its interventions have been counterproductive, destabilizing the region and fueling anti-American sentiment. This video will examine the history of CIA operations in the Middle East, exploring the complex legacy of these actions and their contribution to ongoing tensions. Covert operations are, by their very nature, secretive and designed to be deniable. This means that the government can deny any involvement if the operation is exposed. The CIA's covert operations in the Middle East have included a wide range of activities such as providing arms and funding to rebel groups, conducting propaganda campaigns, assassinating foreign leaders, and overthrowing governments. These operations have often been carried out with little or no oversight from the US Congress. This lack of accountability has led to abuses and mistakes, which have had tragic consequences for the people of the Middle East. One of the most well-known examples of a CIA covert operation is the 1953 Iranian coup. This operation overthrew the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and installed the Shah of Iran as a pro-Western dictator. The coup had a profound impact on Iran, paving the way for the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. The CIA's early involvement in the Middle East set a precedent for future interventions. The agency's focus on covert operations and its willingness to interfere in the internal affairs of other nations created a climate of mistrust and suspicion. This approach often backfired, leading to unintended consequences and exacerbating regional tensions. One notable example is the CIA's role in the 1958 Lebanon crisis. Fearing the rise of pro-Soviet influence, the United States deployed troops to Lebanon at the request of the Lebanese government. The CIA played a key role in supporting pro-Western factions and attempting to influence the outcome of the crisis. However, the intervention further polarized Lebanese politics and contributed to a long period of instability. Another instance of early CIA involvement is the agency's support for Kurdish rebels in Iraq during the 1950s and 60s. The CIA provided the Kurds with arms and training in an effort to destabilize the Iraqi government, which was seen as leaning towards the Soviet Union. However, this support was short-lived and unreliable, leaving the Kurds vulnerable when the US later sought rapprochement with Iraq. The 1953 Iranian coup stands as a pivotal event in both US-Iran relations and the history of CIA covert operations. The coup, orchestrated by the CIA and British intelligence, overthrew the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized Iran's oil industry. The operation reinstated the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to power, solidifying his rule for the next 26 years. While initially hailed as a Cold War victory for the West, the coup had far-reaching consequences that continue to resonate today. The toppling of a democratically elected government fueled anti-Western sentiment in Iran and the broader region. It also created a legacy of mistrust towards the United States, which persists to this day. The Shah's subsequent authoritarian rule, backed by the United States, further alienated segments of Iranian society. His repressive policies and close ties to the West ultimately contributed to the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which overthrew the monarchy and established the Islamic Republic of Iran. Throughout the Cold War, the CIA's primary objective in the Middle East was to contain the spread of communism. This overarching goal led the agency to support a variety of regimes, some of which were authoritarian and had questionable human rights records. The logic behind this approach was that even brutal dictators were preferable to communist governments, which were seen as inherently hostile to US interests. One example of this policy is the CIA's support for the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq during the 1980s. Despite Hussein's brutal repression of his own people and his use of chemical weapons, the United States provided his government with intelligence and military aid during the Iran-Iraq War. The US saw Iraq as a bulwark against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was considered a major threat after the 1979 revolution. This support for Hussein had unintended consequences. It strengthened his grip on power and enabled him to carry out further atrocities. Moreover, the US decision to back Iraq in the war against Iran contributed to regional instability and fueled sectarian tensions between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Section 6. The CIA and the Palestinian-Israeli Conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the most intractable conflicts in the world. The CIA has been involved in this conflict since its inception. It has played a complex and often controversial role. The agency has provided intelligence and support to both Israel and Palestinian factions. Its actions have been shaped by the shifting sands of US foreign policy in the region. During the Cold War, the US viewed Israel as a strategic ally in its fight against Soviet influence in the Middle East. The CIA provided Israel with intelligence and military aid, helping it to develop into a regional military power. However, the agency also maintained contacts with Palestinian groups seeking to influence the course of the conflict and prevent it from escalating into a wider war. After the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, the CIA played a role in supporting the peace process. It provided training and assistance to the Palestinian Authority security forces. However, the agency also continued to gather intelligence on both sides, and its activities were not always conducive to building trust and fostering reconciliation. Section 7. The War on Terror and its Aftermath. The September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States marked a turning point in the CIA's history. The agency's focus shifted dramatically towards counterterrorism, with a particular emphasis on combating Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups operating in the Middle East and South Asia. The CIA played a central role in the US-led invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, which aimed to topple the Taliban regime that had harbored Al-Qaeda. The agency's paramilitary officers worked closely with Afghan militias to overthrow the Taliban. They also established a network of secret prisons, known as black sites, where suspected terrorists were detained and interrogated. The CIA's use of torture and other controversial interrogation methods during this period sparked widespread condemnation and damaged the agency's reputation. Moreover, the agency's involvement in the Iraq War based on faulty intelligence about Saddam Hussein's alleged weapons of mass destruction further fueled anti-American sentiment in the region. Section 8. Blowback and Unintended Consequences. The CIA's covert operations in the Middle East have often had unintended consequences, leading to what is known to describe the unintended negative consequences of a country's own actions. In many cases, the CIA's interventions have backfired, creating more instability and fueling the very forces they were intended to combat. The CIA's support for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the 1980s is a prime example of blowback. The agency armed and trained Afghan fighters to battle Soviet forces, contributing to the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989. However, the US failed to anticipate the rise of the Taliban, a radical Islamic group that emerged from the chaos of the Afghan civil war and later provided safe haven to Al-Qaeda. Similarly, the CIA's role in the 1953 Iranian coup had long-term consequences that continue to haunt US-Iran relations today. The overthrow of Mossadegh and the installation of the Shah created resentment towards the United States, paving the way for the Islamic Revolution and the rise of an anti-American regime in Tehran. Section 9. Conclusion. Navigating a complex legacy. The CIA's legacy in the Middle East is complex and multifaceted. The agency's covert operations have had both positive and negative consequences. While the CIA has played a role in toppling dictators and combating terrorism, its interventions have also destabilized governments, fueled insurgencies, and contributed to human rights abuses. The CIA's actions in the Middle East have often been driven by a Cold War mentality focused on containing the spread of communism and promoting US interests. However, this approach has sometimes blinded the agency to the complexities of the region and the long-term consequences of its actions. Moving forward, it is essential to acknowledge the CIA's controversial history in the Middle East and to learn from its mistakes. The agency's covert operations should be subject to greater oversight and accountability. Moreover, U.S. foreign policy in the region should prioritize diplomacy, dialogue, and respect for the sovereignty of all nations. Only through a more nuanced and balanced approach can the United States hope to foster peace, stability, and prosperity in the Middle East.